process. So with that being said, give me one moment to start our official live stream on our YouTube. And here we go. Great. So thank you all again for joining us. I'm going to pass things over to our wonderful expert, Hattie Bennett, and I'm sure you will enjoy. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Sekou. Hello, everybody, and welcome to my talk on the fabulous exhibition Donatello at the V&A in London. Before I dive into Donatello, I just thought I'd introduce myself. My name is Hattie Bennett. I've been a context docent for 7 years. I absolutely love sharing my knowledge around the various museums and galleries of London with context clients. I'm a freelance art history lecturer. I have a BA in art history and an MA in the history of decorative arts. I worked as a curator and also for the London kind of art trade for 10 years. Anyway, enough about me, boring. Let's move on to the man himself, Donatello, 1386 to 1466. Born and died in Florence, where he ran a workshop solely and in collaboration. He had commissions that took him across Italy, including cultural hotspots, including Siena, Rome, and most importantly, Padua, where he remains for 10 years at the height of his career. He collaborates with and is indeed friends with other great Quattrocento artists, including Ghiberti, Masaccio, and in his early career, he even travels to Rome with Brunelleschi, where they spend several months excavating and examining ancient sculpture. He masters, of course, all sculptural disciplines, stone, marble, wood carving, moulding and stucco, goldsmiths' works, and of course the mighty bronzes, which we're going to finish this talk with, as well as developing new disciplines, probably most famously or most importantly, his low reliefs, which have been described as painting in marble. He's always innovative. He absorbs developments such as Brunelleschi's linear perspective and architectural features. His Madonnas and children are influential for a whole generation of Florentine artists, as are his Man of Sorrows, slightly more influential in Venice. To give a little bit of, kind of idea of characterization, I've gone to Giorgio Vasari, the biographer of the Renaissance artist, who describes him as happy in old age. You can see from his dates that he has a long life. He's generous to those who needed it. Apparently there was a basket full of cash in the workshop that anyone who needed it could help themselves to. But contemporary records show that he was somewhat haphazard in his own account keeping and was living with his mother in his 40s in Florence. So just a sort of, I hope, a little bit of personality to, a figure from the misty kind of dawn of the Renaissance. The painting that I've put up here is a 19th century painting by Richard Redgrave. It's in the exhibition. There is no kind of firm attribution to a painting taken from life of Donatello. Redgrave is referring to a panel in the Louvre, possibly by Uccello, possibly after a lost fresco by Donatello's friend Masaccio. So to get onto the exhibition itself, here we are. It's a first major UK exhibition to explore the works of Donatello, with 130 works by Donatello and his circle. So instead of as well as Donatello, you get works by sculptors such as Ghiberti, artists like Masaccio, Fra Filippo Lippi, and indeed Mantegna. It's the third and last of the 3 exhibitions held in collaboration. So first of all in Italy, then Berlin, and now finally in London. Some, of course, of the most famous examples by Donatello are just too fragile, too valuable to move. So we don't have the famous bronze David. However, this is supplemented by the V&A's 19th century replica from the cast collection. The academic scope and the curation gives an impressive overview of Donatello's career, and I think enables a real understanding, well, not just of his technical wizardry, which is incredible, but his absorption of Renaissance ideas of things like perspective, of naturalism, understanding of classical form, and then, of course, his influence on the development of Italian art. And the exhibition really clearly shows this. It's wonderful. It's beautifully displayed and lit with a kind of series of little rooms that are chronological, but also highlight the kind of development of his career, and a thematic. So there's the first room, which I'm showing you here, is Florence, and we get goldsmiths work. We get the sculptor's studio, Padua, and so on and so on. So, it's arranged in a very kind of clear narrative, if you like. For someone that is 5'2", it is also really wonderful to be able to see these things up close. Of course, going to Italy and seeing the Donatellos, in context is marvelous, but very often, they're high up on a plinth or over an altar or whatever. So it is really good to be able to get a good old look at these wonderful, wonderful objects. Now it closes next week on the 11th of June, but the V&A has a very, very strong collection of works by Donatello. So do, by all means, next time you're in London, or if you can't make the exhibition, do enter the V&A. It's free. Unlike the exhibition, to sort out. And for this talk, actually, I've tried to include as much of as many of the highlights that are actually owned by the V&A that will be there, at other times. So great reviews. The Times gave it 5 stars, pure magic from marble. I have written. So I thought I'd start off with this wonderful bird's eye view of Florence, which is in the V&A's collection, because, of course, this is where Donatello's career is going to be mainly centered. And I think it's really interesting and a reminder when we visit Florence about how tiny actually the civic center is. Roselli, the artist, has highlighted the 2 great public buildings that we can see here, the Duomo and the Baptistery, and the Piazza Signora with the town hall and so on. But I mean, as you remember, to walk from here to here is, barely 10 minutes. Very, very small centre. And of course, the Republic of Florence is surrounded by other sort of city-states, papal states, and so on. It is 13th and 14th century, coming into its great period of wealth and of learning, and of course this wonderful artistic hub. The first figure that greets us is this early David by Donatello. And David, of course, is so associated with the city of Florence, not just with Donatello, but of course with the famous giant by Michelangelo in the Accademia. This was an early commission by Donatello. It was intended with a group of other Old Testament prophets to kind of adorn the Duomo. However, the project kind of failed. And this figure was modified in 1416 and eventually placed as a kind of allegory of civic pride in the town hall, in front of, we're told, a display of the Florentine lily, gilded lily. It must have looked rather wonderful. It's a good start to see how his career develops in kind of this in stylistic terms, because you can see here that, of course, this David has this wonderful Gothic, elegant curve, the international Gothic style, where we get these wonderful kind of curving, elegant, graceful figures. So not the sturdy Renaissance naturalism that we're going to so associate with, his later career. And, if you think of the David and so on. Beautiful head of David that we can see, I've just put up in detail. And then he's kind of resting his slingshot on the head of Goliath, excuse me, which still has the stone implanted rather gruesomely in the forehead. And David is really a metaphor for the city of Florence. As I say, kind of faced with Goliath from either side. His young face we can see is alert, he's garlanded. And it provides a really good starting point for the development of Donatello's style into the naturalism of the Renaissance. While we're still in Florence, there's, and you can see here, this is what I'm talking about over here, we have these cabinets of Madonnas. And when I was looking at them, I was looking at the labels thinking, okay, after the Donatello, Donatello Ghiberti workshop, Donatello or follower. And I just thought, a bit of clarity with an artist that's working, so long ago with attributions and provenance is a bit foggy, to say the least. Just to give a bit of clarity. So if we start with this plaque here, this framed stucco object, this is, small enough to be perhaps a domestic sort of altarpiece, or perhaps to be out in an outside shrine. But if we look at the narrative, we've got a very tender Madonna and Child with head together, which is a real Donatello kind of motif, framed in Brunelleschi style framing architecture, drawing the eye into the central group, and then surrounded by 4 angels, again, implementing perspective to give depth and weight, particularly with the way that this lute kind of comes out, it sort of foreshortened towards us in its really beautiful original frame, God the Father up at the top, and then little plaques here, which presumably would have heraldry of the owner at some point. Now, there are several of these, and scholarship would suggest significantly that these were things that were produced in Donatello's workshop to an original design. The sophistication clearly comes from the master. If we look at this terracotta over here of the Madonna and Child, again, the motif of the head of the 2 heads together, Donatello technique, but we know that Ghiberti creates images like this in his workshop. Ghiberti, to remind you, is the sculptor goldsmith who creates the 2 famous sets of doors for the Florence's baptistry, and in whose workshop Donatello works in his early career. And then the very, very beautiful Melon Madonna from Washington up here, which is coloured still. And while the grace and the movement, the kind of thrust of the Madonna as she walks forward is Donatello, that sophistication, the sweetness of the figures. Do you see the Virgin is smiling, and the little chubby baby has got his finger in his mouth, thumb in his mouth, looking very innocent. That is beautiful, but it is not Donatello. Donatello's Madonnas have this kind of melancholic quality to them, which puts a question mark to whether it is by the great man himself. But, until proven provenance is made, there can never be clarity. Now, into the area that is devoted to the workshop, the V&A put up a very helpful screen of a sculptor at work, along with sculpting tools as well. These are 2 objects, which are kind of workshop objects. This is 1 sheet of paper, the recto and the verso. Design, drawing, absolutely central to the Renaissance Quattrocento workshop. Vasari tells us that in drawing, he was resolute and made drawings with great virtuosity and vivacity that he had no equal. And if you compare these to other workshop drawings, which are usually quite static, very beautiful, there's this incredible dynamism to Donatello. This pen and ink here, this is David. The side that is on view in the exhibition is the Massacre of the Innocents, which is a very, very complicated composition, multi-figured, highly emotional, obviously. And he's managed to capture with a few strokes of the pen, there's somebody that's holding off somebody over here, somebody beating, and so on, this kind of melee of figures. We know that Donatello encouraged his students to study drawing, and Vasari himself says that he owned several Donatello drawings in his collection. But again, provenance and time means that it's very difficult to attribute firmly, but this, the V&A and scholars agree, is the most likely candidate for a firm attribution. And it's a very, very individualistic style that we have. This terracotta plaque seems to be made in a mold. There are fingerprints on the back that would suggest it's been pressed into something. And it's a presentation modello for a patron to give a suggestion of what in this case, finished altarpiece might look like. So again, we've got the characteristic kind of framing motifs, Brunelleschi and so on. And then this complicated narrative scene, multi-figured, taking place. We've got flagellation and a crucifixion and a predella sadly damaged in the V&A. In the 1420s, 1430s, for about a decade, Donatello shares his studio or combines a workshop with another sculptor called Michelozzo, who was also from Ghiberti's workshop. So you can see this stable. Michelozzo is most famous, I suppose, now as the architect for beautiful San Marco in Florence and the Medici Palace. In any case, the 2 of them are given a commission at Prato to create this really wonderful exterior pulpit here. And the pulpit was used to show off the very, very precious relic in the Duomo, which was the girdle that was believed to be handed down by the Virgin Mary, no less, to St. Thomas, and then finds its way to the church. And it, of course, is displayed to the population on feast days and so on from this very pulpit. Now, the immense pride, and as well as the, heavenly kind of literally connections with this particular relic. I mean, it is incredibly celebrated. And when Donatello comes to do the design for the decoration for the pulpit, we don't have a kind of biblical narrative. What we have are these beautiful, sweet dancing angels, the spiritelli, which is again a motif that's going to recur throughout his work. I mentioned that when he was with Brunelleschi, he was in Rome looking at ancient sarcophagi, for example, and this is a kind of idea of what I mean. So that's kind of from classical Rome, but here it's been transported into these purely joyful rings of, praising, happy, joyful angels dancing in this sort of endless ring of roses. He uses different sort of sculptural depth to give that kind of illusion of a ring of figures, but also, of course, the way that the composition, the way the figures are posed also gives us that idea of kind of eternal movement. With this little figure here, for example, on his tippy toes, this one, just about to come down for the dance with tambourines and so on. So 2 of the 6 plaques were included or are included in the exhibition. Also included is this 1420s Florentine census, which I found fascinating, written by Michelozzo. And this explains that Donatello brought no money to the workshop, just his tools, living with his mother and his sister, and is also not up to date with his taxes. Now we get into the goldsmiths, and this is where we have these 2 kind of rather unknown artists, at least to me, to give context of goldsmiths' work. Now, Donatello trains in a goldsmith's workshop, again, conventional for artists to start training here. Of course, you get to learn technique, working in minute scale as well as in greater scale. Botticelli, for example, begins his work in with a goldsmith. This is tiny. This is an enamel of the Annunciation. This really is a real show stealer. It's enormous, a head of God from the keystone of Milan Cathedral, of course, God being the keystone of the universe as well. But you can see the detail that the artist has used here in something that is way up in the cathedral, with this kind of windblown hair and the curls of his beard and the slight crow's feet and all of that. Just absolutely wonderful. Then I want to look at the series of busts. I haven't got time to talk about them all, but just this very neatly tells the story of the development of the reliquary, the vessels that were used to hold religious artifacts, a saint's skull, a thorn from, the crown of thorns, all of that were put into very, very precious and decorated objects, usually kept within a church. And the comparison that the V&A has given just speaks so clearly about the way that Donatello uses kind of Renaissance thought, his own kind of learnings from studying classical busts and so on, to create something that is completely new. So this is a 14th century reliquary of San Donato. It's very much conventional. We have, this kind of bland idea of spirituality. There's a little bit of individualism. He's got this wonderful, marvelous gold hair, and he's wearing ecclesiastical robes. So he must have been some kind of cleric. When we look at Saint Rosaro, who was a Christian martyr, we get the idea of a soldier, but we also get, with the armor here, but we also get the idea of naturalism and individuality in that face. It's not a very good slide, so I've got this one instead. And so I hope you can understand what I mean by the idea of the kind of classical bust, the bust from antiquity, which are portraits. The line is being blurred away from that kind of spiritual type that we saw in the earlier one into something that is much, much more individualistic. I mean, look at the way that Donatello has given us stubble, for example, on the saint. So we have an idea of age, but we also have an introspection with that furrowed brow and so on. Now, his beautiful marbles, which are, his person, his innovation, the way that he is able to kind of conjure up, kind of literally painting with marble to give us these wonderful narrative scenes. This is in the V&A. It's Christ giving the keys to Peter. So we have an ascension, but also a narrative from the gospel of Christ naming Peter as his follower. So therefore we get, the head of the Christian church going up to heaven and then passing literally the keys of heaven to Peter. And so we have these two stories, combined as this kind of metaphor for the importance really of the Pope, of papal power, if you like. He's borrowing, or he's aware of what's happening in Florence, people like Masaccio painting these figurative groups with figures, that we can't see. This is the Virgin Mary seen from the back, and then also combining two subjects. If we look at it in detail, we can see the marble has been pretty much scratched in some areas to give an idea of trees. Over on the other side, we have Jerusalem, and then much more sculptural to a kind of depth of 2 or 3 centimeters for the figures over here. What I love about these are the angels. And Donatello seems to have exploited this medium to create this kind of, these angels that are kind of hovering ethereally kind of out of the marble. So this little one over here, can you see there's a cloud in front of him and here's a little hand grasping it? And similarly this one, they're kind of weaving inside and outside the clouds, which gives them this kind of lightlessness, as well as as in the narrative. Of course they're angels, they fly, but also in terms of the way that they are carved into the marble really, really lightly, as opposed to the more earthbound mortal figures here. And then similarly, oopsie, in the beautiful Virgin and Child plaques that we have here. This is the one from Boston, where we have again exactly the same sort of thing: Madonna and Child clinging together in clouds, surrounded by angels that are sort of almost coming out of sea foams. Beautiful. This one from Berlin is so stark in comparison. We have that architectural feature again that I mentioned, leading our eye into the two faces, those two noses pressed together, but we don't get the sweetness that I mentioned. There is always this kind of stark melancholy to these Madonna and Child groups. The V&A have included a picture, this painting by Filippo Lippi, kind of working in Florence slightly later. But again, we get that idea of the two heads together, this lovely naturalistic pose. But of course, we got that sweetness that is so associated with Florentine painting from the 1550s, 1560s. Another example could be somebody like Mantegna over on the other side of Italy. The V&A have also included objects like this. This is bought in the 19th century as a Donatello, but it just is to demonstrate the following, the way that his followers use this kind of technique in carving to give this very, very light relief. This is made as a sarcophagus for a saint. The actual marble is classical. It was used as a trough, apparently, until it was rescued in the 19th century. Water trough. And then another little hang, more Madonnas and babies. But what I particularly liked about this one, and I've got the image here, is it gives you an idea of the context of the thing and how it was displayed. And presumably this is, well, not presumably, this is worked out before the figures are made, how it is going to, well, first of all, be displayed, what's the context, but also how is it going to be viewed from below. And so we can imagine that we would walk into this in a niche, in a church, from the right-hand side. And so we are faced with these two faces. Again, this kind of melancholic expression that you get with Donatello's Madonnas gazing down at us, holding the apple there from the tree of knowledge and so on. This is painted terracotta, so that tradition that he gets from the Ghiberti workshop. Very nice little little display. Very, very happily the whole story is told in this display. This bronze charger was given to Donatello's doctor, whose bust is in the V&A here, and as is the charger. We are told in the quote from Giovanni Cellini, who this is, the doctor, that Donatello gave him this object after he was treated for an illness. But very interestingly, it says what this thing was made for. I was given a roundel the size of a trencher plate, in which was sculpted the Virgin Mary and Child at her neck and two angels on each side, all of bronze, and of the other side hollowed out so that melted glass could be cast onto it. And the V&A very helpfully has got a modern glass casting so that you can feel it, you can see it. And so, that would suggest that Donatello's workshop were producing, I mean, they're not mass produced, it's a complicated procedure, but there are these plaques that are being, kind of manufactured presumably for domestic sale. Interesting story about how this thing was acquired. It was in an English family in the 1950s who were using it as an ashtray until it was inherited, taken to a dealer who understood exactly what it was, this lost Donatello, and thankfully it's at the V&A for us all to admire. Now, I mentioned that Donatello goes to Padua at the height of his career, where he remains for 10 years. So why Padua? Well, if you've been to Padua, you'll know why. It's about half an hour on the train from Venice. I really recommend visiting it. It's beautiful. It was very much damaged during World War II, but we have the Giotto Chapel and also the beautiful Basilica of St. Anthony of Padua. In the early 15th century, it was a hub, an artistic hub. Groups of artists gathering around a rather unknown artist now, artists including Mantegna, Crivelli, Uccello from Florence came to visit, and Donatello. And what drew these artists together was this inspiration from classical sculpture. Of course, in Italy, Padua is an ancient town, so sarcophagi and marble and so on were studied and then reinterpreted for the kind of Renaissance. Most famously in Padua, we have Donatello's equestrian statue of Gattamelata. Of course, there's no way that is going to come to the V&A, but instead they managed to get from Naples the incredible horse's head, and it arrived with great fanfare. It had its own Instagram page. Just to give you an idea of the scale, I've managed to find this picture of it to show you how huge it is up here. This is a crucifix I'm going to talk about in a minute, so just to give it a bit of context. And the naturalism in this horse's head is remarkable. That mouth that's open, he's fighting with his bit, eyes are rolling, veins, prominent, the muscles of that neck. We get no doubt that this is an incredibly strong animal. And of course, this is all part of the sort of iconography of the mounted rider, literally with his hands on the reins of power, if you like. If you can control a wild beast like this, you can control, in this case, an army in the King of Naples, who this possibly was commissioned for, of course, his kingdom. Really wonderful thing. How am I doing for time? Okay. First major commission in Padua is a crucifix to go in the Duomo. This very, very beautiful crucifix, again, hanging above the altar. We will look straight up at Christ's head that we can see here, mouth open, veins, shown on his forehead. When we go back from it, we can see that we have, the human suffering of Christ combined with the divine beauty of his body. What I really love about seeing this was this amazing loincloth, which it seems to be like a very rough piece of material tied with a rope, blowing in the wind. There's this kind of, this wind that is blowing this. And of course, that gives us a sense of the time and the place of perhaps Christ with his mouth open is saying his last words. But also we remember that there was a tempest that raged around Golgotha at the time of Christ's death. Again, I've got another from Padua, from the same altar, which is Christ as a Man of Sorrows. Very, very influential for Venetian artists, this particular pose. What Donatello has done here is he's given a sense of texture in the textiles of the angels, of the background as well. But this very, very mournful scene of Christ as dead between Good Friday and of course resurrecting on the Sunday, but the time that was the most sad on earth when God was dead. And just to finish off with some rather joyful, again, some little angels, all pretty. The Spiritello with the tambourine on the right was created with 5 others for the font at Siena Cathedral, and it does exactly like the pulpit Spiritelli did, in that we've got these joyful images, twisting and turning. This one is turning from the waist, big smile on his face as he bangs his tambourine, standing on the shell, of course, connected with the baptism rite of water, but also a symbol of Christian pilgrimage. The Attis Amorino, of course, is totally secular. Debate rages about who this little figure is. Is he Mercury? Is he, somebody suggested Lucifer? He's got wings, but he has also got a tail, which is problematic. He has a belt and he has leggings, which are sort of falling off his body. Can you see? And then he's standing on a saint, but these are on a snake. But both of these are freestanding sculpture. And of course, that is what Donatello today is most kind of acclaimed for, the standing bronze David. But this gives you an idea of another standing figure, and of course arranged in the exhibition so that he can be viewed from 360. And then just to finish with just an idea of the design of the exhibition. The exhibition finishes with works of art by artists who have been very much inspired by the work of Donatello. But I thought this was really beautifully designed, because we have the three Davids. This is the first David that we saw. And then we have the plaster cast that I mentioned of the David in Florence that can't be moved. And then this is called the Martelli David, and it's a late David that, again, question mark, but it is thought that Donatello was commissioned by the Medici to do a marble David, and then the commission changed to bronze, hence this one. And this was finished by another artist. But the proportions, of course, are, you know, naturalistic Renaissance, as opposed to the lovely curvy, the sway of the earlier figure. So I'm sorry that there's not long to see the exhibition, but in any case, you know, next time you're in London, do pop into the V&A and see their fabulous collection. So thank you very much. I've done it on time. And Seiko, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Hattie, for a lovely lecture as always. If you want to dive in more to this topic, since we don't have any time for questions today, I'm putting a link in the chat to this lecture, which will be held on June 29th at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So definitely tune in there. And I also included a link to other upcoming lectures we have with Hattie. So definitely check all of those out. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can always reach us at digital@contexttravel.com, and we'll help you out as soon as possible. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Hattie, for a lovely lecture as always. And I hope to see everyone again soon.
Thank you.